So why does coaching mean different things to different people, Lou, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think probably from where coaching's come from, sort of from sports and from therapy. So I think there's blurred lines in terms of how people interpret that. Whether it be they think it's mentoring. So I think there's still work to do. I think it's still quite a new industry, and I still think there's work to do in defining actually what coaching is and what it isn't. As it progresses and as it grows. And for me, coaching is all about the here and now, and it's about the future, and it's about getting the most from people. In short, it's not about dipping into the past and sort of stirring up. And therapy, it's all about where you want to go and where you're at now and how you get there. And that's certainly my sort of short definition of coaching.
And Alison, from your perspective as well, then why what's your opinion on why it means different things in different environments?
I think, again, picking up on what Lou said, it's that different perceptions of it. So you hear about sports coaches, about life coaches, career coaches, and there's kind of, well, what does that mean? And I think often, having worked in a larger organisation, sometimes people think, coaching's only for senior leaders, or coaching's there to fix something. So I think people can then get those different perceptions of it that sometimes necessarily aren't true.
Louise, what would you add to that?
Yeah, similar echo, really. I think from where an individual comes from, their background, so what they've experienced so far, their life history, all the values and the belief system that they come with, their background as well. So coaching, can be interventional, can be frivolous, can be a bit American, all of those kind of things. So I think there's a lot of kind of mixed messages out there. And even when they experience it, often clients will still say, oh, that was coaching, or that wasn't quite how I expected. So I always kind of finish a session saying, and how was that? Any takeaways? And often I get a lot of kind of, gosh, I didn't know what I was expecting, but I wasn't expecting that. And yet they're just the dichotomy, even in that statement from people, is really interesting, I think. And that's the reflection of really how it's still slightly unknown in lots of pockets of society. But there's work in hand doing all that, isn't there? And I think as we progress and a bit more rigor comes into it, and maybe even an academic qualification becomes more well known, then hopefully some of that myths and the vague stuff will solidify, and we'll get clarity on it, maybe. Or maybe we won't. Maybe the whole idea is that we interpret it for exactly what we need it to be at that moment in our life. So career coaching perhaps is relevant at one point, but also some more kind of lifey coaching stuff might be relevant for the same person 2 years later. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think it's really interesting because it does mean different things to different people. Sport's been mentioned, which is where most general people associate that word with a head coach or a coach of some sort. But it's very much about skills, isn't it? It's very feedback driven. It's tactical in nature. But even in large organizations, working with some people recently, it's almost referred to as a quality checking or a quality assurance thing sometimes, the word coach in large organizations. But you're right, Lou, to pick up on what you said, it is still a young industry. And I guess what we're talking about, when I first qualified 7 years ago or whatever it was executive coaching. That's what it was called. I don't know if that's the same for you, but that's what it was. That's what I was inducted into the world of executive coaching. Now we call it professional coaching. And I guess executive coaching never really sat quite well with us, Alison, for the reason you mentioned, that it was like the preserve of senior people. And that probably was the reality then, because if you're going to pay for this service, it's quite expensive per head, I suppose, compared to large programs of development and stuff like that. But I guess what we're talking about is coaching more generally. So it is interesting, Louise, that does it really matter? Essentially, as long as it's effective for people at the time. So I guess, Lou, you just give us a bit of your definition there of coaching. If we were to sharpen the conversation around what is it to us then, if we had to sit down with somebody, a client, a coachee, whatever you'd refer to them as, how would you define coaching? Alison, what would you say to that?
I think I suppose having, obviously as a coach, but also experiencing coaching myself, the biggest thing is for me is about creating space for people and to explore whatever it is that they want to explore. And it's about helping them to find whatever output that is. And when I, and that output doesn't have to be an action. It could be a different way of thinking or a different way of feeling or a different way of being. And I remember when I had my, it's something I remember when I had my coach training, my coach tutor saying to me, we're human beings, not human doings. And sometimes, I know this isn't grammatically correct, but how we be and how we are can make a bigger impact about what our thoughts are, what our state is, than actually some of the things that we do. So for me, and it's something that I use on my profile, it's about creating space for growth or development, whatever that may be. And it will be different things for different people.
Louise, how would you define coaching?
There's a couple of different ways, but the one I come back to often with clients, particularly if they're a little bit nervous or perhaps unsure about what to expect, I just kind of try and reassure them and talk about, saying the next hour is going to be the best conversation you have about you, because that's kind of really what I want to try and create, is that focus on someone to be heard, to be seen, and maybe to put some actions or some new thoughts or behaviours in play. But often those first two are crucial, particularly in the first early sessions, I think, just someone to be acknowledged and heard. So I try and create a space where they feel free, open, vulnerable if they need to be, certainly honest if they can be, and that seems to be quite a good, positive, constructive footing for most sessions to start. And if I think about that, for me, I don't need an hour, but 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a couple of times a day to feel heard and seen. God, how amazing is that? And so for me, that's kind of my everyday application of coaching, really. If I was thinking about, what does coaching mean? I want it to be accessible. I want coaching interventions and coaching conversations to happen all the time, naturally and beautifully, amongst everyone. It's not just a qualified coach that can have a coaching conversation. We can have coaching style conversations at any point with anyone, and ultimately that's the kind of space that I want to operate in, I think.
It's really interesting, isn't it, that, and quite sad in a way, that there is a need for a structured or a service for people to be heard and seen. Wouldn't you think that would just happen anyway? But it doesn't, does it? Especially if we're talking about in an organizational sense, just to pick one way of looking at it. Everybody's so busy, and of course we're all divided up geographically now with everything that's been going on. But even before that, everyone's busy. We transact with each other. We don't really ask the questions that would show that we're being curious about people or whatever. So it is an interesting one, that coaching offers something that you would think you would get anyway from just human interaction, but regrettably not. Lou, you offered some definitions before. Is there anything else you would offer that you would normally sit down, for example, with clients or coaches to let them know exactly what this whole thing's about?
I really like this kind of creating space thing, because I think that it's just, as like you say, it just doesn't happen often enough, does it? And coaching is very much about that. I'm here for you. I'm listening to you. For me, my definition is it really is about pulling the full potential, accessing the potential, purpose. That's for me and my style of coaching. It's very much about purpose and potential, and very much about goal setting. I am all about goal setting, and that's the very first thing I do with my clients is, what are we working on? What do you want to be? What do you want to do? What do you want to achieve? So my style of coaching is very much about, where are we going? What needs to change? How are we going to get there? Almost a sort of project planning to some extent. However, it's not just surface skimming. It's if needs be, that much deeper dive behaviours and mindset to help us achieve the objective or the goal or whatever it is. And I think the thing I want to get across is there's lots of different types of coaches out there, and you only kind of find your voice and your type of coach, the type of coach you want to be, I think, as you progress and develop as a coach. You find your niche, or your niche, as they say in America. But But certainly that happened for me. So as a new coach, I coached everybody, anyone that wanted coaching, I did it. And then in that process, I found my purpose, which ironically was to help others find theirs. So for me, the definition is very much about purpose and potential in terms of how I coach and the type of people that I attract, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I love the idea of that kind of we develop as we're developing others, and that kind of just that, and we're role modeling, aren't we, all the time? That evolution of us as, operators in a business world, but also personally, our evolution, learning, developing all the time. And I think that's crucial, actually, that we. And that kind of comes on to what we'll talk about later in terms of the boundaries and stuff like that in coaching. But we're not gurus dispensing wisdom upon high. Often a coachee will come with something that, oh my God, resonates. Oh, I'm struggling with that at the moment, or I've recently struggled with it. And it can be a co-creation a lot of time, I think, as well. Which is ironic because obviously we're kind of getting paid for it. But that aside, I do think there is a growth in doing and being and experiencing together and giving each other that space to develop as well. And I like that kind of development that goes on, and that learning you talk about, Lou, of you kind of developing your brand or your niche through working with others. I think that's wonderful because it signals that it was true, authentic, evolving.
And how I have never worked with a client where I haven't learned something from them.
Yes.
So to me, this is like the best job because it's a win-win. They're paying me, I'm helping them, but they're helping me. They might not know it, but I always take something away. You cannot not grow in this industry, and that's just awesome, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think because you're not offering, coaching isn't about offering your opinion. You get to hear almost an unfiltered approach from other people, and you're almost, I wouldn't have done it like that, but I'd never thought of doing it that way. And that, as I say, that opportunity to learn from people. And I think picking up on something Louise you said, and Stephen, you built on that bit about listening, about when do you have, to be listened to is so powerful. And I was watching something on the television this morning about it was about I'm a Celebrity, and they were saying about how they kind of got off over the boredom, but it was all around, we talked, he said, and people listened to each other and you felt heard, and that was really special. And people came out of themselves more because they had the opportunity to talk and be listened to and be heard. And I think we shouldn't underestimate that, what a difference it makes. I always say, when do you get an hour to talk about you, just to talk about you and fully focused on you? It doesn't happen because you almost get that interference from other people. Whereas that coaching space is purely, it's about them, it's about their agenda.
Yeah, I mean, this is the for me, one of the most fundamental things that I know we're defining it, but almost defining what it's not. And it's been mentioned a couple of times. We're not there to espouse the right ideas or advise or give advice or instruction or anything. In a world where everybody is conditioned to tell. That's the way I kind of reconcile this, is that in organizations, it's what's rewarded. It's what is recognized because we're knowledgeable. So we share, we tell. It's just the way we operate. And not only are people conditioned to telling, but people are conditioned to being told as well. Do you know what I mean? So there's kind of there's just a tell, and there's nothing wrong with that. In 90% of situations, it's appropriate because it's sharing of information and stuff. But that for me is where it becomes so powerful, in that actually I might have an issue, I might have a topic, I might just be stuck. Whatever the reason for coaching. And instead of the usual interaction, which is a queue of people around the corner ready to give me their opinion on how I should resolve something, someone's going to listen and ask me and get me to think and challenge me and all that sort of stuff. But that's for me why it's so powerful and so different. But for new coaches, and I say this as someone who's been on that journey, that's quite a difficult thing to switch off, to not do, to tell, to be the person who just asks questions and who's curious for the right reasons and all that sort of stuff. I mean, one of the things, just to add to what's been said, is that I tend to say to people who I'm working with is, as well as a myriad of other things that you do at the beginning of a relationship like this, is I'm good. My role I see is to ask you the sort of questions that you maybe don't ask yourself, or maybe avoid asking yourself. Do you know what I mean? And therein lies a bit of the challenge as well. But if you're seeking some skills development, then training's for you. If you want to build some knowledge, then perhaps it's a course or a book you read. If you want to change habits, think about behavior, then that's what we're here for. I don't know what you think about that.
I think one of the underestimated elements of coaching, I think for some clients, is, as we said, creating that space, but almost to not normalize, but to give that permission to perhaps get rid of some of those emotions. Because actually we know that when we're in a highly emotive state, it's really difficult to change habits or behaviors, or think clearly, or make good decisions. So often with a particular set of clients, I very much talk about those early stages, or in every session, but in the early first few minutes, let's just get rid of the emotion. And if you need to rant, cry, stomp, walk around the room, bang something, do it. Get it out of the way, and then we can start speaking logically. And not to treat them like a toddler, but almost that outspill of emotion that sometimes we're not allowed to do in a formal setting, in a work environment. And some people really need that kind of safe zone. And then we can start working with some of the habits and embedding, or, new strategies and whatever. So I think that's really important to think about as well, that space that we create, but that service that we perform in a couple of different levels, and then we can signpost to training and development and more structured stuff and bits and pieces. Sorry, that just occurred to me, just in that kind of that outspill of emotion that sometimes needs to happen. Because touching on something that Ali said a few minutes ago, you said something about presenting certain faces, Ali, and actually in the coaching space, they're allowed to just be themselves and be more authentic. And it really resonated with me, because even as evolved professionals, mature professionals that are exposed to all this amazing learning, and we do know great stuff in the coaching world and in the world we operate, but actually we still sometimes wear masks, and we are filtered, and that's a shame. And sometimes it's very appropriate and highly recommended, but other times it is good to kind of be unfiltered and to shed those masks of expectation. So I like that opportunity that we can just be, and I think I like to create that for my clients as well.
What I like about that is I can now justify to those around us when I'm stomping around the house that it's for my development. Louise.
Please do. You have my permission, Stephen.
Sorry, Ali, you were going to say something.
No, I think for me, going back to that bit about that unfiltered, I know that I when I was having some coaching myself, I said something, and I was kind of like, oh, I can't believe I've said that out loud. And it was that point, but that's what I'm thinking, and that's what I'm feeling. And actually to vocalize it not to say it made it better, but it just kind of it kind of brought, I suppose, what was in here out. And the thing I think, and I suppose I was doing a bit of judging myself about how that came out, but what I knew was the person sitting in front of me as my coach wasn't judging what I was saying, because coaching it's not about being judgmental. It's not about they're not there to, when I say, to analyze me or judge me. So it felt it was that safe environment where, what, I can say what I think and what I'm feeling about something and somebody, and it was okay to do that. So I think it's that can be really powerful. And sometimes, as I say, it's the stuff that's, like you say, it's been bubbling, and it could be from, like you say, that question that that nobody, I'm going to ask you the questions probably that you don't ask yourself, or maybe you ask yourself but you push away the answer. I think by doing that, it's that really opens up different possibilities.
It's permission, isn't it? It's having permission and that vulnerability, the whole Brené Brown sort of piece.
Yeah.
But that is it. You have permission, and you obviously build that psychological safety as you build that rapport in your relationship, and that's pretty precious, isn't it? To feel safe, to be able to express and not be judged, and to be vulnerable. So yeah.
And something you said earlier as well, Lou, about potential. I've just been thinking about as we've been talking about it. This idea that we're there at the service of somebody else, but not to advise. We're there to create that safe space that you've just been talking about. But I don't know what you think, but for me, our belief in what essentially is a complete stranger at the beginning of the relationship, but our belief that they will get there, that they are capable, that everybody has the potential with the right set of circumstances or stimulus or whatever it might be, you've kind of got to have that. Because if not, I think if I ever had that doubt, it would be difficult to coach. Do you know what I mean? It would be difficult not to advise and steer. It would take me down a different route. So it's not walking around on clouds just thinking that everybody can achieve anything just on a whim, but that this person's capable of resolving or settling or whatever it is that they've presented to you.
Yeah,
I think that's essential, isn't it? As coaches, it's having the belief in that individual. And I mean, I wholeheartedly believe that anybody can change and they can achieve whatever their dream or their goal or their aspiration is. And this is kind of where the neuroscience and the whole mindset piece comes in. I'm particularly interested in all that kind of stuff, because I think by going a bit deeper and looking at patterns of thinking and behaviors, etc., that's where real fundamental change can happen. I mean, that's probably a topic for another day, but yeah, I think having belief and I suppose, dare I say, being the cheerleader as well, because if you someone believes in you, it's like a child, isn't it? You're more likely to sort of be brave and step forward. So
Definitely.
One of the phrases I remember from my training, unconditional positive regard. So as a coach, that's what we show our coachee. And I just think that encapsulates everything. It's a phrase that's absolutely stayed with me from day one. And I just think if you break that down, and that's your guiding light for when you're dealing with clients, you can't go too far wrong with that. So unconditional positive regard, I think, fuels really constructive, positive conversations. So for me, that's my kind of benchmark, really, of being with a client in a session.
Okay.
Again, I had that. Sorry.
No, go for Ali.
I had that again. The tutor, always remember the person in front of you is creative, resourceful, and whole. And it's and I've tended, I have a tendency sometimes to go into rescuer mode, so I have to very much dial that back in, obviously get rid of it in my coaching, but it's a useful thing to kind of remember, that we're not there to fix them. They, whatever it is, they've got the capabilities themselves.
There's a lot spoken about in professional coaching about the management of boundaries, and I guess what's being referred to there is the management of where coaching starts and ends, and where other sorts of development interventions begin, and all that sort of stuff. Louise, if I come to you, why do you think it's important to have that sort of clear distinction between coaching and other things?
I think it's just moving on from Ali's point of view about that, kind of our tendency as a coach potentially to go into what our favoured position is. So Ali's talking about, her preference for being a rescuer. That doesn't help the client, the coachee, at all. My idea of the boundaries for me are useful because I want my clients to self-serve by the end. Coaching for me is short, sharp intervention. It's meaningful, it's constructive, it's positive, it has movement and dynamism to it. So if I keep that in mind, that helps me kind of understand what the role of coaching plays, as opposed to the role of a mentor or the role of a training program that might be layering information or skills onto someone. Whereas I think of coaching because I'm working with a client, so they self-serve. and they rely on their own being and experience and decision making process. So that helps me just make that definition between the different disciplines. I know that's not probably as clear as it could be, but and I think as a coach, often we can work with someone and then signpost them on. And I think as long as we're doing that, that's useful as well. I'm not saying I know exactly how someone might develop a skill in X, Y, and Z, but I recognise when the coaching relationship has come to an end and it stopped serving the coachee, and therefore they then need to move on to something else. So I'm not sure whether I've answered that question for you, Stephen. I'm sure other people have much more wisdom to share.
Well, just before we get other people's thoughts, you know, the way you've described it makes us think a little bit about the way I would think about it as well, in terms of, it feels like at times where, as well as doing good work, right, and asking questions and challenging people, we're almost educating them in the process. I don't know if this is how it feels to you, but it's like both parties have to be aware of what the boundaries are, because otherwise it won't work. Do you know what I mean? It just, if there's an so let's talk about the other things briefly. You know, the other boundaries, we could cross into mentoring, which is very directive. It could be teaching. You know, in fact, most of the other things that are developmental in nature include tell, where coaching kind of doesn't. So I guess for me, if I'm not really clear, to your point, Louise, or we're both not really clear, the coachee and the coach, then it muddies the waters a bit. You know, if I'm on the other side of the conversation expecting to be told something, but the coach is wanting you to offer something, then it's just not gonna. It's going to be difficult, isn't it? It's going to be a pretty laboured conversation because the expectations haven't been set. So that would be my what I would add to what you've said. It's almost like we're educating the other person into the process. Go for it.
So can I just have a little counter to that?
Yeah, of course.
So that word educating, it doesn't sit well with me. Can we change it? For me, I'd like to think of it as equipping.
Equipping, I like that. I'll take equipping and replace educating.
And that feels more coachy, whereas the educating still has little shades of the training and skill, that kind of skill stuff, the teaching stuff. So for me, for clarity in my thinking, equipping sounds better.
Like it. What do you think, Ali? These boundaries, why are they important?
I think for me, it's getting over to your coachee that it's a separate relationship from anything else. So the coaching relationship is separate. So I'm not aligned to your line manager or whatever it is, your organization or your whatever it is, the people. You know, I don't have a tendency to favor anything over anybody else. My role is purely to serve you as the coach, and it's separate from that. I'm not reporting back about this, that, and the other. So it's really recognizing that it's a different space, and that it's a coaching space, and it's a confidential space, and I'm not, as I say, as we've all said, I'm not there to tell you what to do. My skills as a coach is to help you find the answers within you, and that's my skill of a coach. Whether it's the questions I ask, what I play back to you around what I'm seeing, I'm hearing. I maybe kind of sense from something. So coaching is very unique, and I think it's difficult to give it a one sentence description. But for me, I think the boundary is important. It's a separate space. It's separate to your other working relationships or other relationships that you have. It's a place for you to come and for you to bring whatever it is that you're bringing. And we'll work together on whatever that looks like. And that, as I say, it's that confidential bit, and that's that safe space. I think we've talked about that safe and that psychological safety. That's what makes it special and different to me.
Wonderful, thanks, Sally. Lou, what would you add to that in terms of these importance of boundaries?
For me, I'm going to come from a slightly different angle, because I'm thinking, to me, boundaries, it's thinking about happens when someone doesn't show up, and how, as a coach, your boundaries as the coach. What happens if someone's late to the meeting? What happens if, from if you're running a private practice, they don't pay on time, and all of these kind of things fit into this sort of boundaries conversation. So that's kind of where my thinking is at the moment, and how you deal with that as a coach. What do you do if somebody doesn't show up, or they're 10 minutes late and they're not respecting your time? So for me, there's definitely something to consider for coaches, and I've worked with a lot of new coaches, and one of the first things I get them to do is, what are your boundaries as a coach? How will you know when they're breached? And I've worked a lot with new coaches running their own business, and we're so eager to do well and to be the best, and and it's very easy for boundaries to be breached. So there's this piece around not slipping into mentor therapy, etc. But actually, what about this piece around time and money and energy? I can think of many examples where my boundaries were breached as a new coach, and I allowed that to happen. It wasn't them, it was me. So that's something I think all coaches need to think about.
Interesting. Yeah, because it is we're talking so far about being at the service of somebody else, but this is a joint relationship, isn't it? It isn't one way. The client is the focal point. It's their topic. It's their agenda. All that good stuff. But there are two people involved here, so it's an interesting one about protecting your boundaries. Just to throw another question in there, be really interested to get your thoughts of all the experience that you've all got around having these possibly initial conversations with people around boundaries, about making sure there's clarity around what coaching is and isn't. How accepting would you say are your clients of this intervention, this coaching thing that they may have put the hand up for, or in certain cases in the corporate world may have been volunteered for? That happens sometimes. So yeah, just to throw it out there, how accepting are people in your experience of what you're presenting to them?
Really good question. It's horses for courses, I think. Broadly, I'd like to say in my private practice, I worked with people that wanted to be coached, they were fully entered into it, fully engaged and fully motivated to work in that coaching space. Very rarely, I'd say maybe 10, maximum 15% of my private clients were told to be there or sent or whatever. And they're quite easy to identify straight off, aren't they? Because they think they're engaging, but they keep it quite superficial most of the time. One or two you still get some great breakthroughs with, but lots still stay quite detached. So I can't really share great experience of dealing with a lot of people that don't want to be coached, in fairness, because the vast majority of people do turn up and they want to be involved in that conversation. They really see the benefit of this hour for me, my time. And even if nothing else, some of them, it ticks their ego box. Hey, I'm going off for my coaching session now, or whatever. So broadly, I've had quite an easy time with most people in that sense. So I haven't really got any war stories to share, I'm afraid.
It's the same for me. In my private practice, people are seeking me out as the coach and they're paying me. So, but that doesn't mean they don't procrastinate or self-sabotage. And then there's something deeper to look at there. That's a conversation, again, for another time. Why do they not show? Or, and often there's resistance, or the goal might have shifted or whatever. But yeah, in my experience, and even in the education setting, I think, again, on the whole, most people are they want to learn. They've decided to do it. So it's been very positive for me for the 14 years I've been doing it. I rarely come across someone that's really resistant. They're there because they want to be there. And on the whole, most of them understand what they're getting into. They understand what coaching is, which is good, isn't it? So we don't have to kind of work too hard at unpicking that.
I think similar to Lou and Louise. I mean, I worked for an organisation where coaching was open to everybody. And it was an organisation of, I'm going to say, 80,000 plus people. So it was open to everybody. Whether people knew that it was open to everyone or knew it was there is possibly a different thing. But you came to look for a coach, so it wasn't you were kind of told. So people that were coming because they wanted to have that coaching. But I did have I'm going to say a few instances where people were told, and it was offered, I'm going to say, as an intervention around some performance. So I was probably a bit wary of those conversations, thinking, oh, okay, they've been told. So I think the key thing for me was to talk to them around what's your understanding of why we're working together, and what this coaching is going to do. And I think it was having that upfront conversation and saying, okay, well, what, almost that kind of, what's your understanding of why you're here? What do you think that you can get from it? Because if you're kind of thinking, oh, I've just been told and it's not going to be any good, is that actually a good use of both of our time? So I think it's, as I say, I've been fortunate where people have they've wanted to do it, and they're kind of open to it. But I know, just in working with some people on coach who are doing coach training, they've been, I think they given people, and I've been told to come along to get some coaching, and I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing, and so on. So I think that's we've just had some conversations around, okay, let's just talk about what that, what coaching is, what it isn't, what can they get from it? Because I think, it's the mindset that people come with can make a real difference, I think.
Definitely, and it's great to hear for everyone listening as well that all of these stories are mostly positive. That people are accepting of it, and it works. Who'd have thought it? It works. Well, I mean, there's a couple of things that we'll definitely touch on in future episodes in much more detail, like that idea of contracting up front properly, and we've sort of touched on that. Even potentially sort of ethical issues around when people are sent there for under performance reasons or just performance reasons, and how do we deal with that? So it's definitely one we'll delve into. But something else you said there, Ali, as well, again, almost going back full circle to the definition discussion we had a little while ago, the upfront nature of these conversations as well, the frankness of these conversations is, again, I think something that probably puts coaching conversations different to the everyday conversations that people have, because the other conversations that people have, I don't know if you agree or not, the superficial was mentioned before. We do a lot of work conversations, for example, not just superficial or transactional, or it's about the work and the widgets and KPIs and all those other sorts of things. But as a coach, you do have to be really upfront about and really frank about what we're here for, and the length of time we'll spend together, and what, as a client, you need to bring to the table, and all those sorts of things. So yeah, just something you said, Ali, just reminded me again of this, trying to define this thing that makes coaching different, and that would be my view of something else to offer on that.